Ladies, gentlemen, welcome to our seminar about bioeconomy, circular economy. We will try today to give content to this, try to understand, try to step a little bit forward. It's easy to discuss these issues. It's often also easy to agree upon what to do. The difficult thing is to do it. There you often end up in a political process, where you meet decision makers who says it's too early, or it's too much, or perhaps we can come back later and take a new discussion. So there is just now a moment of hesitation. The intellectual arguments in favor of bioeconomy and a circular economy is overwhelming, especially if you look upon it from an economic perspective. The political support is not impressive, yet, at least not in Europe. We must remember this. We are living in a part of the world that is under political pressure. We are not used to that. Many of us in this room have spent our days in political structures in Europe, where they always have been aware of what to do, and we have had the resources to do it. Since 5, 10 years, we don't have that situation. Now the Union is under pressure. It's a dangerous time. We have many weak governments in Europe. The positive thing is that the economies are picking up again. From a low level, yes, and how much, we don't know. But with my experience as a former Minister of Finance and Prime Minister, I must say, I prefer to govern when the economy is picking up, even if it is quite modest figures, but it's going in the right direction. That often gives room for initiatives, bold initiatives. Perhaps we can see in a couple of years individual governments in Europe taking the lead about bioeconomy. Perhaps we will see in a couple of years also a new European strategy for the bioeconomy. We don't know that yet. I know one thing. We are not alone. We have a tendency to think that we are the only ones who are discussing these issues. That's not true. If you go to the other side of the Atlantic, you can just now see a quite strange performance. I don't want to mention names, I abstain from that. But if you look upon that, you see one more interesting thing, and that is, even if the new US government have said that the Paris Agreement is something they will not follow or honor, and then change their mind again and then again. Even if that is taking place on the ground in US, it's an impressive development going in the right direction regarding developing new technologies that are environmentally friendly. Why? Because they have the scientific strength and they have the capital. Perhaps the political support in that situation is not the critical dimension. Perhaps this development has already passed, so to say, the political programs. Everyone has discussed this for so many years. It's time for action. And if the politicians are not strong enough to do it, the business society is starting to realize this is an opportunity. This is not a break for economic growth. New technologies, research, development, investments, that is a driving force for economic development. And those who take the lead will probably develop methods and products that the rest of the world will recognize as bioeconomical approaches to the situation we have today in world economy. And here you have some of the solutions. It might not be in Europe. It might be in US. It might be in China, because they are pressed, severely pressed by public opinion. Strange to hear that the Chinese politician is under pressure from public opinion. But I had myself a conversation 2 years ago in January in center of Beijing with a terrible smog. We saw maximum 20 meters ahead of us, and he said to me, the minister, this will become an economic problem for China. And even more, it will become a political problem. That was the first time I ever heard a Chinese political leader admitting that they will have a political problem. That is the dimension of mismanaging the task to combat climate change, literally on the street level. And to combat climate change demands new technologies. And to combat climate change demands a circular approach to economy. Perhaps there will be a political leader in Europe also that takes the lead. And when I meet with young people, I have a very strong feeling that they are becoming green, not necessarily in a political meaning, but they are thinking and arguing from a biological perspective. Just look around the world and see upon how they are treating what they eat, the vegetarian food wave, for instance. For me, as a meat producer, that is quite painful to see, I must say, but I must be honest and admit it. And they are well educated. They are intelligent. They are young. They belong to the future. And I would be extremely surprised if no politician started to answer to this wave among the young population, at least the young, well-educated population, the future opinion builders in every developed country. This is the new situation. So from that perspective, I am hopeful. If I look upon the European political perspective, I'm a little bit, if not pessimistic, so at least a little bit careful. If I look upon the world development, I can see many doing a lot just now, taking these demands of bioeconomy into good business projects. And suddenly you have a new driving force for economy. Perhaps our friends in this process will not be the old technologies and the old industries. They might be a little bit afraid of what's around the corner. They might say, wait, take it easy, not too fast, because they have invested in the old technologies. The old technologies have often also been quite profitable, And quite profitable companies and organizations also have resources to engage lobbyists in different kind of forums. So there will be also a firm resistance. And when it comes to forestry, you can notice sometimes that those who have very high ambitions regarding how to protect forests, not seldom end up in companies with the old oil companies. I who live in a culture, literally, I live in a forest. Sweden is a forest. I know that when we use our forests, we are able also to protect biodiversity, and we are able also to develop good business. Using our forest is perhaps our best contribution combating climate change in countries with a lot of forest resources. That is a moral obligation to combat climate change, because if we fail in that task, we don't have so many options for the future. So the difficult thing is maintaining this serious approach and awareness of the danger, and at the same time talking about the possibilities and the attractiveness in the new situation. This will be a start for something we haven't seen before: the circular economy, bioeconomy, combating climate change. We are all engaged in this, in one or another dimension, and we all realize this. We can contribute. And the best thing is, it's so easy to explain, and people who are informed also like a narrative that they can understand, and they can also link to their own experiences. This is understandable, what we do, if we do it the right way. But we can also confuse it, I can guarantee you. And if we do that, it will be no popular support at all. This is our task. This is our challenge. This is why we have met here in Berlin, because the German government has taken the lead in Europe and have formulated high ambitions. Now we are also, with big curiosity, following what Germany is doing, so to say, on the ground, because now we are coming to the close and very difficult task, not only to talk about it, but also to do it. Therefore, we are here today. Thank you for hosting us, and once more, welcome to this seminar, arranged by European Forest Institute and its think tank, ThinkForest. Once more, welcome. Now I have the honor to introduce a friend, Knut Øistad, from Norway, who has been elected the new chairman of the board of European Forest Institute. Please, Knut, say a few words about yourself and how you look upon your task. Please.
Thank you, Chairman. I will link how I look upon the task a little bit to this event. But first, I would like to thank the German government for making this event possible and for taking the lead, as the chairman of ThinkForest said. This month, it's 5 years since first ThinkForest event was organized in Brussels. And I have been able to follow it and its development, and received clear message that ThinkForest has been a very much needed platform and has provided an informed dialogue on European forest and how they can contribute to address important challenges, numerous of them just mentioned by Göran Persson. We need this type of event, and we need these discussions more than ever. EFI, European Forest Institute, has now a new strategy which is ambitious in its vision, as it aims to positioning the institute at a globally recognized European science policy platform. Our task is to generate policy-relevant science to unlock the potential of forest and addressing emerging challenges, being it economic, environmental, or social. The new strategy is articulated around the importance of forest and its sound governance in building a bioeconomy and increasing the resilience of our societies. EFI aims to facilitate science-informed policies for the benefits of our society and for the development of our region with all the challenges just explained by the chair of ThinkForest. I have much hope and great expectations for the organization, the network of research institutions and its member countries, that we together with the new strategy and our collective effort will provide policy-relevant science in the future to a very crucial time for Europe and the rest of the world. Again, thank you very much for this event. I'm looking forward to the discussion and the presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Knut. And now we start the seminar. And I invite to take the podium Janez Potočnik, co-chair of the UN International Resource Panel. But before that, a long-standing commissioner in the European Union, 10 years, 10 good years, 2004 to 2014. I remember when you started. We were both young men at that time. But still, the same drive and engagement. Please, Janez.
Thank you, Göran. By the way, after your introduction, which was an excellent summary of today's conference, we could skip the conference, but anyway, let's do it. So I will be trying to lead you through the story which has the title Economic Model Transformation and what would be the role of bioeconomy in that context. The structure of my presentation will be first the world we live in and the challenges we are facing, so some of the basic facts, then economic model driving our lives, bioeconomy, circular economy and sustainability, and finally I will do some conclusions on the basis of the presentation. But let me start with the world in which we are living. By the way, I'm currently, as it was already mentioned, the co-chair of International Resource Panel. This is UN-based. It's a kind of sister organization of IPPC, which is more known. They are dealing with climate change. We are dealing with resource management. And I took the presidency or co-chairing 2 years ago. And now, of course, the political attention to those areas is becoming more important than in the past, and we sincerely hope that some of our messages might be understood better than they were in the past. Whenever you will hear the sign of IRP and the sign of UNEP on the top, it means that that statement is based on the research which we have done inside the International Resource Panel, like you see in that slide. So the 20th century we can actually call the century of the great acceleration. The growth of population was by a factor of 3.7. Annual extraction of construction materials grew by a factor of 34, ores and minerals by a factor of 27, fossil fuels by a factor of 12, and biomass were actually growing by a factor which was the same growth rate as the growth of population. At average, total material extraction in the 20th century grew by a factor of 8, and greenhouse gas emissions grew by a factor of 13. What was the result of that? The result of that is the best seen in the planetary boundaries approach, which was done by Stockholm Resilience Institute, Professor Rockström from the beginning, but this is already the source of Stefan and the others from the 2015, where we see that in 9 planetary boundaries, in 2 we are already beyond zone of uncertainty in the high risk. This is management of nitrogen and phosphorus and biodiversity disappearance, while in 2 we are in the zone of uncertainty, increasing risk. This is land system change and the climate change. What is the picture telling you, the slide telling you, is that all 4 areas are to a large extent connected to the food production and food systems. So in the future, the way how we will manage the food systems will be central to the sustainability of our lives. Let us now go to the 21st century and the facts we can't ignore. Population growth, we have all got used to the figure of 9.7 billion in 2050. What does that mean? It means that you will have in 1 generation additionally on the planet 2.5 billion people. 100 years ago, the overall population on the planet was 1.4 billion. In 1 year, you have additionally on the planet Germany, a bit more to be precise. In 4 years, additional United States of America. In 9 days and 6 hours, my country, Slovenia, which is obviously small. So what is interesting and more important is that all that is happening in the developing part of the world. So it's not connected to the developed part of the world. And they are all aspiring that they would live the same quality of life as we do. And they are all growing faster as we do, which is absolutely right. But the problem of that is that, of course, the pressure on the use of various resources will be even bigger. Let's look now to the social story. Oxfam report, 62 people own the same as half of the world, and the richest 1% is more wealthy than the rest of the world. Difficult to say that this is something which is sustainable. Nearly 800 million people are hungry, over 2 billion suffer from micronutrient deficiencies, while over 2 billion people are obese. Less than half of population is living actually in, let's call it, normal conditions. We throw away 1/3 of the food which we produce. Environmental story. Increasing evidence of the climate change threat is something which is obvious. 60% of ecosystems today are already degraded or used unsustainably, which is still connected with the vast majority of people living well on the planet. 1/3 of soils, it's moderately to highly degraded due to various reasons, and 467,000 premature deaths in Europe, it's connected to the air pollution. So it's not only China, it's also Europe. This is approximately 15 times more than premature death in car accidents. Urbanization. Around 50% of urban fabric expected to exist by mid of the century still needs to be constructed. Between 2000 and 2030, it is estimated that developing countries would have added 400,000 square kilometers of built-up urban area, which equals to the world's built-up area in the year 2000. And probably the most interesting and shocking fact, China in the years 2011-13 used more cement than United States in the whole 20th century when they were building up all their cities. This is from the World Economic Forum. Nearly half of all the work we do will be able to be automated by the 2055. And probably the most important fact which you should take into account is that for the first time in human history, we face the emergence of a single, tightly coupled human socio-ecological system of planetary scope. We are more interconnected and interdependent than ever. Increased multipolarity is a fact. In Europe, we have, and also in other developed parts of the world, we have assumed it in a bit different way that it happened. We assumed that this is a new market for our new high-tech products, but in essence, it was a huge competition on our markets, of course, also with a new market for our products. So it's a two-side way. Finally, the conclusion of that would be that our individual and collective responsibility has enormously increased, even if we would compare it just to a generation ago. So let us now look to the economic model driving our lives. Maybe the best you would see that in the development trajectory, where you see in the horizontal X human development index. So more developed you are, more right you are. Here it's the ecological footprint, so higher you are, higher it's your ecological footprint. The dots are the states, global states, and the dots surrounded by red are European Union states. This green corner contains all the countries where people are living well within the planetary boundaries. 0. What is the problem is that in the development trajectory, development path, countries always move up and right, not horizontally right. And when they face, we face problems with the environmental preservation, with our health, then we start to move down. So a lot of responsibility is in the developed part of the world that we show that we are able and ready to move down. Of course, there is a lot of responsibility also to China, Brazil, Russia, the other big players, not to repeat our way. But technology and also knowledge is to a large extent also mastered in the developed part of the world, so we have to show the way. These countries here cannot repeat that pattern even if they would like to, because it's physically impossible. It will not work. So if we are sincere in implementing sustainable development goals, we have to help them and we have to change the economic system. So this is a bit simplification of the world in which we are living. We have a price signals which are somehow financial capital is overvalued, human capital is undervalued, natural capital to a large extent not valued at all. Then we put that into our market, where we have prices and quantity, and producers, consumers, rational behavior, and at the end of the day we live in an economic model which has inbuilt economic, social and environmental imbalances. And that's the state of reality of today's life. Hermann already some time ago talked about that. He was saying the optimal scale of the macroeconomy relative to its containing ecosystems. It's the critical issue to which the macroeconomics has been blind. This blindness to the cost of growth in scale is largely a consequence of ignoring throughput and has led to the problem of ecological unsustainability. Throughput is defined as entropic physical flow from nature's sources through the economy and back to the nature's sinks, or put it in other words, this should not be declining and natural capital should actually, so the stock of natural capital should be preserved, should be kept intact while we talk about the flows. Bringing the concept of throughput into the foundations of economic theory does not reduce economics to physics, but it does force the recognition of the constraints of physical law and economics. To translate that statement to you, we were fighting that environment would be based on equal basis with economic and social, but in essence it should be like that. So all socio-economic, socio-technical system should behave inside the given ecosystem limits. Or if you want to put it, this is the slide from European Environmental Agency, this is how actually it should look, so that you keep everything in balance. By the way, this is so logical and natural that it's difficult to say that it should not hold. But as you said it rightly, in the real life and in the solutions which we make, this suddenly becomes quite difficult. So we are indebting our generations, or better to say future generations. How do we know that throughput growth, or even the GDP growth, it's not at the margin increasing yield faster than wealth and making us poorer than richer? This is a serious question, because a lot of things, you know the famous externality story, and a lot of things, if you would add also the natural capital cost, would look totally different. These are selected sectors without natural capital costs included, and this is their profit margin with natural capital costs included. How does that come, and how does that we hear so many times that whatever you do from environmental area, it's additional cost? Yes, it is, if you consider that those costs today are not existing, but those costs today are existing. Only we are denying them. We are simply, either they are paid through the, health system, or they are paid by farmers who produce less, or it's simply shifted to the next generation, which is the easiest. So this is a real problem of the today economy. So 3 messages which we should remember. Good growth, bad growth. How much of the growth in the past actually qualifies for growth? We don't know. We don't know answer to that. We know how much we have calculated officially, how much it was the GDP growth, but we have never taken externalities on board seriously. We are more or less all focused on GDP growth rates, but what really matters at the end of the day for your quality of life is GDP level. So I will ask you a simple question. Would you prefer to earn 100 euros and grow 10%, or would you prefer to earn 1,000 euros and grow 1%? By the way, in both cases, you have 10 additional euro per year. And when you go to the shop, you don't go to the shop and say, I'm growing 10%, can you give me that and that? But you have a hard currency in your pocket with which you can buy. So if you have a luxury that you can discuss the growth rates, yes, you need already to achieve good levels. So in Europe, probably today, a bigger problem is the distribution than it's actually the economic growth. So if we keep our levels of quality of life, and if we would a bit more concentrate on other issues than we are, maybe it would be better. And finally, you should always remember that if somebody is growing 10% per year, this means doubling of all the resources in 7 years. Or if I translate, if you are growing 7%, it means doubling in 10 years. In the midterm, according to our research, except in specific cases, resource shortage will not be the core limiting factor of our economic development. But the environmental consequences caused by this excessive and irresponsible use of resources will be the limiting factor of future development. These are some facts of our last 2 reports which we have produced. One is Global Material Flows on Resource Efficiency. This is the data flows of materials from 1970 till 2010. And this is the resource efficiency potential and economic implications which we have done for G7 and G20. About material flows, 1970-2010. 4 clear messages. Consumption has been stronger driver of growth in material use than population growth in last 40 years. Economy, not population growth. Second, since 2000, material efficiency has actually globally declined. We use globally more resources per unit of GDP than before, even if all countries are using less resources per the unit of GDP than before. How is that possible? Because we have a huge structural shift from countries like Germany, which is resource efficient, to countries like China, which is not resource efficient. So this structural shift is globally causing that we are using still more resources than actually all countries are endeavoring that they would. The richest countries consume on average 10 times more materials than the poorest. By the way, even among the richest countries, Europe is consuming almost half of what is done in United States of America. And the level of well-being achieved in wealthy industrial countries cannot be generalized globally based on the same system of production and consumption, which is basically saying that the same thing which I repeated before. So decoupling of human well-being, economic activity from the resource use, and both from the environmental impact, it's essential. So that's essential logic which we should follow. We can still grow, but we should use less resources. But even if we would use more resources like it will be the case of developing economies, they should decouple from environmental impact in any case. And from the second research, with concerted action, there is a significant potential for increasing resource efficiency. Second, markets will not achieve higher rates of resource efficiency by themselves. Public policy and political will, it's needed. There are significant barriers to the increases in resource efficiency required, but they can be removed. And finally, improving resource efficiency, it's indispensable for meeting climate change targets cost effectively. To put it bluntly, this is the story of the climate change on which we are concentrating. It can't be effective without being extended on land, water, and materials. And all together, it's actually talking about the same change of the economic model, about the change in the direction of low-carbon, resource-efficient economy. Finally, about the bioeconomy, circular economy, and sustainability. These are, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals, which you know. It's a kind of global contract, which finally we have all agreed up on. And it's a guiding star which we should follow. SDGs, which directly depend on the natural resources, are 12. And I firmly believe that focusing on the responsible consumption and production is the name of the game. Only if you do that in the proper way, you can actually deliver the rest. According to our research, sustainable consumption and production is the most efficient strategy to avoid trade-offs which are existing among 17 goals and create synergies to resolve the development and environment challenges articulated in the SDGs. This is the famous butterfly of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation of the circular economy. Circular economy, it's an economy where you use resources in a way that you keep them in a production and consumption cycle as long as possible, and that you keep their value high as long as possible. This is the stock management, it's non-bio, and this is the bio part. What in essence should be our task of the bioeconomy, it's to strengthen this wing and weaken this wing. Because strengthening this wing of the butterfly could be essentially contributing to the overall balance of the concept and to the model itself. So bioeconomy for me has a major development potential and could be at the heart of the transition to the new economic model, but it has to be ecologically and socially sustainable, organized in a responsible and fair way and consistent with the logic of decoupling and circular economy. It is not about overusing the biosphere, but also not about underusing the potential which is certainly existing. Knowledge, innovation, products should be differently designed, consumers' behavior should be changed, business models should shift. So today, for example, Philips, it's already selling the light instead of the light bulbs because we, consumers, actually want light, not the light bulb. Light bulb is only the problem. So this philosophy is now very much stepping into many of the markets. Any global transition, it's a major new opportunity for the innovation, new development opportunities, new jobs. So don't tell me I'm selling the gloom, because it's just the opposite. I'm selling the major opportunity for future development also for Europe. And alternative, I would rather not talk about it, because alternative, it's the gloom. To conclude, we use many ways of how to explain what is needed: sustainable growth, low carbon, circular, green, resource efficient, energy efficient, decoupling, free arts, ecological civilization, cradle to cradle, bioeconomy, eco-economy, blue. What we actually talk about is that the new economic model based on sustainable consumption and production, integrating all pillars of sustainability, it's necessary and unavoidable. And we talk about that we have to change the broken compass, change it and make again the real right orientation. Markets will not ensure efficiency in the allocation of the use of resources, even if the market will be the core tool of allocation in the future. But we have to be aware that prices do not reflect the true value of costs of the resources, that rewards to capital are disproportionate to the rewards of other inputs, that managers are still awarded, their annual contracts are induced to make short-term investment decisions overly influenced by bonuses based on short-term share price and so on. So whenever I hear the word better regulation, which is in many cases meant to be less regulation, for me that is not about less regulation, but it's about taking responsibility for public good, creating the conditions for confidence to invest in technologies for the markets of the future. Main points which I would like to take, that you would take with you from this short lecture. For the first time in human history, we face the emergence of a single, tightly coupled human socio-ecological system of planetary scope. It is about system change. Without leadership and improved global governance, SDGs are only a wishful thinking, and we are not far from that. Transition to a new economic model, integrating all pillars of sustainability, should be in the center of our attention. Trade-offs among various SDGs are unavoidable. Sustainable consumption and production is the most efficient strategy to avoid them and create synergies. Circular economy is the best concept to operationalize it in practice. Bioeconomy has a great potential, but has to be ecologically, socially sustainable, organized in a responsible and fair way, and consistent with the logic of decoupling and circular economy. Implementing SDGs should be priority of each government, defined in the strategic documents, supported by indicators, monitoring, reporting, linked to the core economic policy decisions. All levels, global, European, national, local, all stakeholders, public, private, financial sector, civil society, academia, should actively participate in the system change. Active dialogue with potential losers is necessary if we want to make transition possible. This is very, very important. If we are to avoid globally extensive and intersystemic crises and frequent conflicts, then let's get serious about implementing what we have agreed in SDGs. Change is unavoidable and humans are supposed to be intelligent, and it is high time to prove it, and Europe should stay in the lead. And this is the last slide. Will it be easy? When Albert Einstein was asked why it is that mankind has stretched so far as to discover the structure of the atom, but we have not been able to devise the political means to keep the atom from destroying us, he replied, "That is simple, my friend, it is because politics is more difficult than physics." So that's actually our challenge which we have to face. The future has already arrived, and it's called present. Thank you.
Thank you, Janez. As always, excellent. And many things to remember and use when we all in different forums deliver our small speeches and reflections. We can steal from you, be sure about that, yes. Thank you. Now we have Waldemar Kütt, Head of Unit Strategy, DG Research and Innovations, European Commission. Please.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the invitation. Maybe I can just start by getting the different definitions right of bioeconomy, because that's always important. People understand different things about the bioeconomy. And definition, actually the first term bioeconomy was used by the OECD, and it was talked about biotechnology economy, really. It wasn't about the bioeconomy as we understood it today. Afterwards, a lot of people talked about bio-based economy, and that was not what really the bioeconomy was about. It was more about the non-food uses of bioeconomy. So what we understood at the bioeconomy in the European Commission, and we developed the first research program in FP7. It's actually before I joined Janez's cabinet. We worked together for 2 years, so thanks, Janez. We developed a knowledge-based bioeconomy. It's called knowledge-based bioeconomy. We should have called it knowledge-based bioresource economy, because that's what it actually was about. And I think at that time, I remember we had a long discussion with Dr. Lange from the research ministry in Germany, who long retired. We worked together also on Cologne declarations and all of this. So that's when the birth of the bioresource economy took place. It was more than 10 years ago. Germany then came up with its bioeconomy strategy in 2010. We came up in Europe with after the 2007 KBBE program, we came up with a political strategy in 2012. And that was done because we saw these interconnections between different sectors of the bioeconomy. We saw that this was not only about food production and feed production, but people were euphoric about that we could use biofuels from biomass, and we could replace fossil fuel industries through bio-based, renewable industries, more resource-efficient industries. Janez made the point that the bioeconomy has the promise of being more circular and more resource-efficient. So that's why we developed that strategy at that time, to link the different fields together, also knowing that we were facing a number of big challenges of feeding 9 billion people by 2050, of unlocking more biological resources to really build a bioeconomy. At that time, biological resources from the sea had not been looked at. We also saw that the bioeconomy, because it depended on local biomass, was very good for rural and coastal development. And we want to look at this. And we also wanted to boost the bioeconomy market. So the 2012 strategy actually had 3 pillars. A big one about that was about investment in research and innovation. I'll talk about this a bit more. There was one on policy coherence. We know that, and we've seen also from Janez, bioeconomy doesn't happen only in the research environment. There are lots of different policies that need to be looked at. And we were looking at the identification of markets and boosting markets. This strategy was at that time done by DG Research. We involved the Agricultural Research Minister, Marine, Grow and Environment. So it was, in a way, a joint effort. And it had some consequences. I think it was very popular. In Europe, after that, lots of bioeconomy strategies came about. Finland came very soon, of course, but that's a long time ago. They are already, I think, in the 2nd or 3rd revision. Germany, 2nd revision. But I would like to point out that just in the last 2 months, both France and Italy came up with a national bioeconomy research strategy, which shows the involvement. A number of other countries are developing their own strategy. It shows the importance of this. This week, end of this week, the Committee of the Regions will have an own initiative report on bioeconomy and rural development. So also the regions are seeing how important the bioeconomy can be for them. Now, just a bit of evaluation of what has been done so far. I think of the 3 pillars of the bioeconomy strategy, the research one was the most, let's say, successful one. We actually managed from the FP7 program to Horizon 2020 to almost double the funding for bioeconomy research. We are now having for 7 years 3.8 billion of money. That's a lot. It was close to 2 billion in the framework program before. We actually cut out 2 billion basically from the agricultural budget, the CAP budget, last time, and moved it to the research framework program, which was a good deed at that point, but not that easy. And I'm not sure we're going to do it again in the next MFF, but that's another question. Yeah, thanks. Never enough. So what happened with this money, we were able to really start a big flagship, which was the Bio-Based Industries Public-Private Partnership. I think this has made a major change in the industry, because we saw that those companies which were going to a more sustainable business model and which were not supported by regulation, we could give them the money to really test out, to demonstrate and to pilot new ways of doing business, to really de-risk what was looked at as both a regulatory risk, but a market risk, but also a technological risk, and even a supply risk. Because in the bioeconomy, you depend on biological resources, and your harvest can be good or bad, and your whole business model is very risky at that point. So actually, I think the Commission has done a great deal for financing flagships that would really test how a future bioeconomy would work like. How can we do new business in this area? I'll give you one example. This is from an Italian company that we financed, Matrica, which is a joint venture between Novamont and Eni. And it's basically producing from cardoon, which is a plant that grows on marginal land. It produces all kinds of biological materials. And this really is, they have converted an old petrochemical factory into a bio-based factory. So it's really, you see the conversion. You use an old, old petrochemical, you use biological resources that are grown on land which didn't provide any material so far, and you produce all kinds of things, proteins, oils, etc. And since we're in the forestry sector, I should give an example of one of our biggest customers also from Finland in the BBI, which is Metsä, which has been is working in a number of projects in the BBI, but who has built really also what they call a bioproduct mill. So that's not a paper and pulp mill like the classical one. It really is a very resource-efficient mill which produces its own electricity. Any byproduct, any waste is basically used for other purposes. They're doing joint ventures to produce textiles from energy, all kinds of chemical materials. So this is really a 1.2 billion investment. It shows how things can be done differently, more resource efficient, more circular. Now, Where are we today? I mean, this was 2012, it's now 5 years ago. You may say, well, nothing too much has happened. I think a lot has happened. We are talking about the circular economy. We are talking about sustainable development goals. People are aware that we need to move our economic model to a more circular one. And I think the bioeconomy does provide some progress in here, or some potentials to really work towards a more circular economy. The circular economy package itself has a lot of issues that are relevant for the bioeconomy. It's food waste, plastic, biomass, bio-based products. But also, of course, legislation is going to affect it. We have now legislation on bio-waste. People in countries, especially the East, are not allowed to landfill their bio-waste anymore. It's a huge opportunity if we don't burn all of this, but really use it in a more circular economy to extract proteins, to extract fertilizers out of this bio-waste. So there's an opportunity where also legislation can feed into the developing the bioeconomy. We have a plastic strategy, etc. So I think we're talking now about modernization cap and food 2030. I think we are at a turning point there. But we're also facing loads of challenges. I mean, Janez has also mentioned a few of those. Feed 9 billion people, 60% more food demand. Doesn't mean food production, food demand. If we, for instance, can get rid of 1/3 of all food waste and be more productive, then we don't really need to provide more food, but we can use it from declining food waste. But we're talking about a tenth of the whole biomass production of the world that we're wasting. It's huge. It's huge. And as Janez also said, we use 70% of water, the agri-food system, 30% of energy, 25% of greenhouse gas emissions. That needs to be changed. That system needs to be changed, and it needs to be made more sustainable and circular. Other areas, other market drivers, chemical industry. The chemical industry today uses, I think, about 7% of fossil resources. That's about the size of the aerospace industry. So it's really sizable. And even under COP21 and OECD, it said, if we want to decarbonize deeply, then we have to also decarbonize the chemical sector. Plastic, for instance, 6% of fossil resources generates 60 billion of negative externalities. That's more than the whole plastic industry's profit margin. So there needs to be things changed. And also there, the bioeconomy with bioplastics, for instance, can at least partially provide solutions there. And if you consider that there is 13% growth rates in the bioplastics area, and that's what people were saying, then until 2013, if we would produce that growth rate with materials inside of Europe, we would need 300 biorefineries to do that. 300. 47 billion of investment. That's the economic opportunity that what Janez was talking about. That's an opportunity to really do different business, but also having growth and being more circular and sustainable. Visions are also coming in other areas, especially cities. I mean, we have talked about the policy not reacting to these new things. There are people in cities and everywhere else who know that these policies are not only industry, but also cities. They say, okay, what if we would become fully biocircular in Amsterdam? That was the vision they had. And they looked at it and they calculated they could get jobs and growth. If you would then put this under the 50 big cities, you'd almost create 100,000 new jobs. You would have around 10 billion of extra turnover. That's the value you could create by going to a biocircular economy at a city level. That's only the 50th biggest city in Europe what they could do. Okay, now we were talking about a review of the bioeconomy strategy. I'll end with this a bit. We have a mandate in the Circular Economy Action Plan that we will look at the contribution to the circular economy of the bioeconomy. We have conclusions actually from the Environment Council which not say consider updating, but update. So the Environment Council is actually politically mandating us to update. And also the Accelerating Clean Energy Innovation that we looked at would say that the bioeconomy has to look at the decarbonization potential. Because if we decarbonize transport and energy, we'll be left with the agricultural sector, which is huge. So no deep decarbonization without the bioeconomy decarbonization. This is just a few dates for you to remember. We will expecting a report from our expert group review in June. We also have a bio-stakeholder manifesto, which we're developing. We have some reviews, a conference on 16th of November where we will present this bioeconomy review. So please put this in mind. Then, of course, for the next quarter of next year, we'll have planned council conclusions. And then the question will be, And the open question will be who, when will we decide on either revising or updating the bioeconomy strategy. Now this is a link, so if you have the slides, you will know where to go. I'll just end with a few more or less personal views on where we're going if we do a new review. What should we focus on? I think Janez is already right. We have SDGs, we have circularity. That should be at the center of a bioeconomy. So we should work towards a sustainable and circular bioeconomy. That should be a new bioeconomy strategy. And for some things that I think are central to a new economy is we not only have to look at flows. 10 years ago, we looked at flows. Can we produce energy of biomass? Can we do whatever? But we never looked at the stocks, except the forestry industry. I think they were very aware of the stocks, but some other sectors didn't really look at the stocks. The soil degradation was not important. It was just how many biomass can we produce. So I think that was a mistake. I think we have to look clearly at how to maintain the stocks and then optimize the flows. I think that should be central. And I think the flows are not only biomass supply and waste, but it's also ecosystem services. That's also an output of the bioeconomy. It's not only food and feed and fibers, it's also ecosystem services, greenhouse gas management. We have to not only feed but nourish people. Today, our whole production system is there to feed, with also 2 billion obese and whatever. We have lots of impacts there. But we have to realize the potential of the bioeconomy for a more sustainable and circular industry. And I think there is loads of potential. We just have to focus on that. And I think this will help also into supporting the transformation of rural areas and cities. And what we need is a coherence of policies and synergies between the EU, national and regional strategies. What you do in a region is not the same than you do at European level. We have to be clear what is a European strategy about in contrast to a national one. They're not the same. So I think we really need to look what is the added value that we can provide at the European level. I think these are the reflections and the things that we need to do in the next half year before we start working on a new bioeconomy strategy. And maybe that's the title of the new bioeconomy strategy in Italy. Bioeconomy, a unique opportunity to reconnect economy, society, and the environment. Janez would disagree and say you have to put it into the environment. But I think it's almost the same context. It's the same meaning behind it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Waldemar Kütt, Head of Unit Strategy, DG Research and Innovation, European Commission. And I'm sorry, Mark Falai, I will not give you the floor, because I think our keynote speaker is on his way in. And you will then, so to say, have the next opportunity after him. Yeah. I think you survive. Fine. He's on his way. 2 minutes. Perhaps we can take a short question then to Janez or Waldemar. Is there anyone? A lot of questions, of course. A lot of questions. I must say, I'm a little bit disappointed to hear that you have the ambition to finance also the next round with reducing the agriculture subsidies. Is that really wise? Don't you need the agriculture sector as a partner in this? Yes?
Well, it's actually one of the objectives of the first German bioeconomy strategy. Read it in detail, and it says that financing from the agricultural money should go into research to develop the solutions that one needs. So I think it's one of the political commitments even that was made in the first strategy to say, well, you need to work on these solutions, and also the common agricultural policy needs to do it. Now, I can tell you details on why in that circumstances, when UK and other countries wanted to cut the whole budget, everybody wanted to keep structural funds and CAP intact and not cut it. And then the Commission didn't want to look foolish and cut the research budget, because that would have looked like an ancient policy move, why all these things were done. It was a bit more complicated maybe than I just said in this first sentence. But it was a way to show that the next Commission budget, or the old one, was a bit more modern, but served everything. So I think it was good maybe for the agricultural budget to lose 2 billion maybe, but to lose it to research which was supporting it. So I think it was an investment into the future.
Once is not an habit. So let's stick to that. No, and there are, of course, having spent a lot of time in the European Union, I must say I'm not so impressed about everything when it comes to how you use the resources. So why not try to find another candidate than the agriculture sector next time? Hopefully. No one is defending that sector today, and therefore I think it's proper to do it. It's fair. They are working hard under very difficult conditions, and they are a natural part of the European heritage. We farmers, as I nowadays say. Now I have the honor to invite the State Secretary of this important ministry. I have said before that Germany has taken the lead in Europe when it comes to bioeconomy. And it is always important in a situation that is formative to have someone that dare to take a political risk or a political initiative. It's not always rewarding, but without those who take these risks, nothing will happen. Now you have started. We are extremely curious to hear about the next step, not only discussing the principles, the programs, but also how will it come to action on the ground. Welcome up, Dr. My glasses. Hermann Onko Aeikens, State Secretary, Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. ThinkForest President, Mr. Persson, thank you very much for your words. Director of the EFI, Mr. Palahi, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Federal Minister Schmidt, I would like to welcome you into Berlin and to the Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture. I'm very glad to be with you today. I'm here representing Federal Minister Schmidt, who unfortunately has had to attend an appointment that could not be delegated. You know about these appointments. He would have liked to have been here today and since his apologies for not being able to make it. I'm particularly pleased that we have managed today to organize a ThinkForest event in cooperation with the European Forest Institute that is taking place here. Normally, this kind of important event would be held in Brussels, at the interface between science and policy. I'm therefore all the more delighted that on this occasion we could attract so many of you to come to Berlin. We enjoy close cooperation with the European Forest Institute. The European Forest Institute is a very active body which enjoys an excellent reputation in Europe and beyond. Over the past years, the Federal Ministry of Agriculture has thus intensified its cooperation with the European Forest Institute as an influential international institution with expertise in forestry. As part of this cooperation, we have funded numerous projects with the aim of presenting the debate on a number of controversial issues in objective terms. Some important analysis and recommendations have resulted from these projects. The recent study on the opportunities and challenges of introduced tree species and the question of integrating nature conservation in sustainable forest management are just two examples of this. Cooperation on the bioeconomy between the European Forest Institute and our ministry is also growing rapidly, which greatly pleases me, but comes as no surprise to me, as a sustainable bioeconomy is not possible without sustainable forest management. The establishment of a European Forest Institute office in Bonn marks another important milestone. With a base on the United Nations campus in Bonn, where the focus lies on the topics of climate, sustainability, and biodiversity, the European Forest Institute will have the opportunity to network with other important international organizations. Not only in Germany have forests and forestry become an ever more apparent topic of political discussion over the past years. Undoubtedly, the steadily increasing and thoroughly diverse and specific demands on forests from society play a role in this development. The multifunctionality of the forest goals and undisputed even if the various interest groups have significantly different priorities. The topics of forest conservation and climate protection have become particularly important in the last few years. Unfortunately, the debate on these topics is not always conducted in an objective manner. But the relationship of German citizens to their forest, as history reminds us, was and still is defined by many emotions. And yet, Germany has an excellent basis from which it can exploit the potential in sustainable forest management and the responsible use of timber. Just some examples. Our forestry area has not only remained stable, our forest area is growing slightly. Despite increased logging and the boom in wood energy, Germany's forests are richer in timber stocks, more ecologically compatible, and more mixed than they were 10 years ago. Even the indicator report on biological diversity has scored our forests highly. This shows the maximum of protection through sustainable use is not a lip service for congresses on nature and biodiversity conservation. Responsible, sustainable forest management is the daily reality of our forest industry. Ladies and gentlemen, in Germany, forestry plays a vital role in the bioeconomy. Timber that is sustainable produced in Germany acts as the backbone in the provision of raw materials for a sustainable, bio-based economy and industry. It is our most important renewable raw material and the bedrock for many jobs. Furthermore, forestry and the forest and timber industry are already contributing to lowering Germany's CO2 emissions by approximately 14%. They are seen as a symbol for the sustainable production of renewable raw materials. Yet the need for sustainable management of resources is disputed today. Establishing a sustainable, efficient economy will be one of the key tasks of the coming decades. We recognized this kind of economy in the bioeconomy and are convinced that of the need to conserve finite, increasingly scarce fossil resources and to replace these with sustainable, produced, renewable raw materials. This is why today we must set the course to actively shape the transition to a bioeconomy. This is something that Germany recognized early on. By international comparison, Germany is a bioeconomy pioneer and has set itself ambitious targets with its bioeconomy strategies. The National Research Strategy Bioeconomy 2030 and the National Policy Strategy on Bioeconomy. We are therefore addressing the bioeconomy from both the research and political perspective. The progress report on the National Policy Strategy on Bioeconomy, which was published last year, confirms that Germany is well on its way in implementing the goals and principles of the National Policy Strategy. This progress includes the planning of various funding programs, international agreements, national and international symposia, and many national and international measures taken by the ministry. However, we have no reason to be complacent. We need to make further progress on the bioeconomy and to anchor this more firmly into the everyday lives of our industry and our citizens, so that we are well equipped for a future where fossil fuels are scarce. The bioeconomy is not a surefire success. It must be actively pursued. In doing so, we will require a well-established bio-based sector such as the timber industry. This means that value-added change must be optimized and research activities that promote the resource and material efficient use of timber must be strengthened. This particularly applies for the development of new, innovative and marketable hardwood products, which is one of the most significant and demanding tasks, as we are not yet able to entirely replace softwood products with hardwood ones. This is where we require innovation in order to tap new markets and the potential for added value in hardwood as well in byproducts of the sawmill and paper industries. My ministry, therefore, recently established a process named Charter for Timber in order to tap the potential of this sector of the economy even more effectively. Ladies and gentlemen, today's joint event with the European Forest Institute is an excellent opportunity to point out the key role of the European forestry and timber sector in Europe's bioeconomy. Together we wish to discuss the opportunities of an increasingly bio-based economy, not least of all for this sector, and what active contribution the forestry and timber sector can make in this regard. This event once again underlines how crucial a role the European Forest Institute plays in policy consultation thanks to its fact-based expertise. I'm confident that the conclusions of today's event can also provide valuable information for the pending revision of the EU Bioeconomy strategy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me underline the audience thanks to the State Secretary, Dr. Hermann Onko Aeikens, for his speech, filled with substance, based upon a long German tradition of world-leading forestry management. We are many in this room who are dealing with forestry. We are many that thinks that our practices, our academic institutions, we have built them on our own. Sometimes that is right, but mostly it is a German origin if you look backwards. So thank you for taking care of that tradition and now taking the lead in the next step of modern forestry, bioeconomy. Thank you once more. Mark Falai.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Aeikens, for your high expectations on the European Forest Institute. So in the next minutes, I would like to share with you some reflections, some ideas, and some examples in the context of the bioeconomy, the EU Bioeconomy Strategy review. And many of the insights that I will be sharing with you are inspired by an ongoing science policy study coordinated by the European Forest Institute with the advice of 4 high-level policymakers, 2 former prime ministers, Göran Persson and Øistad, a former commissioner, Janez Potočnik, and a former minister for environment, Cristina Narbona. 3 of them are today with us. So I will be reflecting on some of the ideas and some of the examples that we are discussing within this team. Many things have been said already, but I would like to start by connecting and probably synthesizing some of the points that have been mentioned so far in order to better contextualize the importance of the bioeconomy, especially the transformational role of the bioeconomy. I think we have basically heard before that the world has become too big for this planet. We have heard that the existing economic paradigm, which is basically characterized by a linear fossil-based economy, cannot address the emerging needs from an increasing global population while addressing the unprecedented, globally interconnected environmental challenges that we will be facing in the coming decades. So basically, we need a new economic paradigm, a paradigm that supports prosperity within the planetary boundaries, a paradigm where biological resources and not fossil resources become the basis for the economy, a paradigm where the bioeconomy becomes the engine for sustainable development. And why the bioeconomy is so important? Well, while energy sector can be in the long run fully decarbonized, as Waldemar already hinted, still we will need to produce an increasing amount of raw materials for construction, housing, transport, you mentioned it. And all these materials still will need to rely on carbon. But if we want to address the grand challenges of our times, which is climate change, this carbon cannot come from the fossil-based resources. Will need to predominantly come from renewable biological resources. And the issue is that since we don't have unlimited biological resources, its use needs to be intelligent, efficient, and above all sustainable. And this is why the new economic paradigm needs to bring together 2 concepts that so far has been developed in parallel. And this has been mentioned before, the circular economy and the bioeconomy. These 2 concepts are mutually reinforcing each other, as mentioned by Mr. Potočnik already. They are mutually reinforcing each other. And we need to connect them in order to unlock their potential to support sustainable development. But let's continue diving into the bioeconomy. I think Waldemar already has illuminated us with different definitions around the bioeconomy. Here I am presenting you the definition adopted here in Berlin 2 years ago during the Global Bioeconomy Summit. But I would not like to put emphasis on definitions now. I think what is important regarding the bioeconomy is that it is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to address our past inability to value nature. So basically, the bioeconomy, what offers is an opportunity to build a synergistic relationship between economy and ecology. And this is the key issue, because I think it's not any longer the dilemma of our times to decouple economic growth from environmental degradation. That is a reactive approach, to be honest. We need a proactive approach. We need to couple economy with biology. We need to build these synergistic relationships. And I think European forest and the forest-based bioeconomy can exemplify very well this synergistic relationship that I am trying to explain. So let's have a look to European forest. And I think this figure illustrates very well why there cannot be an ambitious bioeconomy in Europe without taking serious European forest. It's very simple. European forest, you can see it, is the main biological infrastructure of our continent. And the issue is not because it is the main land use in the European Union already. More than 40% of our territories are covered by forest. It's especially because forest and forest management has a clear positive impact in the sustainability of the key resources to sustain life and at the end our economy in the continent: water, soil, and biodiversity. Without forests, there is no water at the continental level. Forests recycle water. In addition, our forests are the main terrestrial carbon sink. The climate change mitigation effect of our forest is equivalent to more than 10% of the CO2 emissions at European level. This is substantial. This is the equivalent of the joint emissions by the steel and the cement industry together. It's the equivalent of the whole emissions of the entire agricultural sector. So it's a substantial climate change mitigation role. Important to highlight here also that management is crucial to maintain forest as efficient carbon sinks. Because with climate change, we will need to make our forest more resilient. So forest management becomes an important tool in doing that. Last but not least, forests are the main source for non-food, non-feed, renewable biological resources. And this is crucial in terms of not competing with food production. So you see here the arguments why without forests there is no bioeconomy, at least an ambitious bioeconomy at European level. The good news also is that science and technology are advancing very fast, and now with the existing technologies, you can transform forest biomass, forest biological resources, into materials as soft as cotton and as resistant as steel. You can transform forest biomass into green chemicals or wood engineering products for construction. So it's a magnificent raw material. So this means that the forest industry has great potential within the bioeconomy in the coming years. An industry that many times is underestimated, even at the economic level. Here in this table, you have, in terms of turnover and employment, the economic importance of the forest industry as compared to other European industries. You can see that the forest industry, and this is a traditional forest industry. I am not including here forestry, furniture. So it's the traditional forest industry has the same economic scale like the plastics industry. And it's much more important than the steel industry, especially in terms of jobs. So this illustrates that sometimes we are even underestimating the economic relevance of our forest industry. And if we would add here the environmental implications, then it would be really an amazing sector. It's also true that the forest industry is currently, let's say, our assistant director call is, it's in a moment of creative destruction. The forest sector, the forest industry is in a moment of structural changes because the traditional products like printing paper are declining, and a new range of innovative forest bio-based products are emerging, as I mentioned before. So it's in a moment of big changes. And it is expected that probably in the next 10 years, this sector will change more than in the last 100 years. And probably the changes in this sector will come, most of them, from a symbiosis with other sectors. from a cross-sectorial cooperation with some sectors that I am mentioning here. So let's have a look to 3 examples so that we can visualize what can be the important role of the forest bioeconomy. We will have a look to the construction sector, textiles, and plastics. So some of them have already mentioned, so let's continue having a look at them. Let's start from the construction sector, a paradigmatic sector at the European level. Represents 10% of the GDP at the EU level, provides more than 12 million jobs at European level. But look at the environmental impacts of the sector. So the construction of buildings and the use of buildings are responsible for 35% of the CO2 emissions, 42% of the energy consumption, and look at the next figure, 50% of the material use, 33% of the waste. So it's a gigantic implications for our environment. 2 materials dominate the sector, clearly, cement and steel. These are the 2 dominating materials of the existing sector. And it's very simple. This explains partly why this sector has such important environmental externalities. To produce 1 ton of steel, on average, you emit 1.7 tons of CO2. To produce 1 ton of cement, on average, you release 1 ton of CO2. Together, the steel and cement industry, as I mentioned before, are responsible for 10% of the emissions. Okay, but let's have a look now. What is the role of forests? Wood construction. What can be the role in this context? First of all, the technological development of the last decades in terms of wood engineering products like cross-laminated timber allows basically now that there are no technical limitations for building with wood compared to concrete or steel. So we can build buildings as high as they are made from concrete or steel, 100 meters high, and there are no technical barriers for that. And remember that building with wood has clearly positive environmental implications. And the reason is very simple. Producing 1 cubic meter of wood stores 1 ton of CO2. This means that if you use 1 ton of wood products instead of Portland cement, you would be avoiding the release of 2 tons of CO2 to the atmosphere as an average. This is huge implications also, if wood construction will become more mainstream. But wood construction has other positive implications. Wood has a higher thermal efficiency than the steel, concrete, and much higher than aluminum. So building with wood is good for energy efficiency terms. And the benefits, we could have a long list of benefits. Also, it has a higher strength weight ratio compared to other materials, and therefore you require less materials to make the same type of buildings which weigh much less. We could continue, but also I would like to emphasize that the wood construction probably, we could say that has been the most innovative development within the construction sector of the last decades. It has allowed the development of industrial prefabrication methods. You can build now wooden buildings like Lego toys in a way. And this increased safety because the work is taking place in the industry. It increases installation time, and also it increases circularity because it allows you to move from the concept of demolition to the construction and reuse and reutilization. So we could continue talking the whole 20 minutes on wood construction, but I advise you to have a look to our new report on wood construction that you can find here. Let's move to another important industry, the textile sector. Waldemar, I think, already mentioned that. Very interesting industry because it's very fast growing. It's expected that in the next 20 years, let's say, the demand for textiles will increase by 100%. And by 2050, it will multiply by 3, more or less. And this is related to what Mr. Potočnik mentioned. There is going to be 2 billion more people at least joining the global middle class. So this means that these people will need to wear clothes, and the per capita consumption of clothes will increase in many places like China and Asia. If you look at the dominating materials of the textile industry, there are 2 basically nowadays dominating materials: synthetic fibers, fossil-based, and cotton. Synthetic fibers represent 62% of all the textile fibers production, and cotton around 24%. wood-based textiles, which are already possible, they have been possible for many decades. But what is important to emphasize is that with the new technologies developed in countries like Sweden, Finland, also Austria, you can have now wood-based textiles which are clear reduction of the carbon footprint compared to the fossil-based textiles, up to 9 times lower carbon footprint. And this is very important. But this is not the only reason why wood-based textiles, the demand for them, will increase sharply in the coming decades. The main reason is that cotton production is stagnated. 50% of the cotton production is coming from China and India. And what is going to happen there? Chinese and Indians will need the land for food production. Cotton competes with food production. Cotton requires a lot of water. Look what happened in the Aral Sea. No sea anymore. So the water consumption by cotton is huge. Pesticides, fertilizers. By the way, cotton is an example of how bioeconomy, if we consider bioeconomy in an open way, many times it's not sustainable. Cotton production is a biological resource which is not sustainable. Okay, so it is expected that the dissolving pulp, which is the raw material for wood-based textiles, will be increasing in the coming years at a rate of around 4%. This is what is expected. To be honest, I think this is a conservative estimate, and it will very much depend on how serious do we take the bioeconomy. If there are real incentives, I think this could be really several times higher, especially because the demand will increase and cotton cannot increase. So only by covering the gap left by cotton, you will have already that growth. So if we take serious also the substitution of fossil-based fibers, wood-based textiles have a great potential in the future. My last example, the plastics industry. You know that in the last 50 years, the production of plastics have multiplied by 20-fold. 20-fold, in 50 years. Nowadays, we produce 300 million tons of plastics globally, which results in almost 400 million tons of CO2 globally. And what we could say that have even more environmental implications, it results in 8 million tons of plastics leaking to the oceans, with huge implications for the marine life. And if we continue business as usual, the picture is not very promising. Business as usual scenario expects that the demand for plastics will be 400% higher by 2050. This means that it will represent, Waldemar, you mentioned before, 6% is nowadays. It will represent 20% of the oil consumption and 50% of the CO2 emissions. But again, even more negative implications is that if we continue with the business as usual scenario, we will have more plastics than fish in the ocean by 2050. I think that at the current rate, it's like throwing 1 truck of plastics per minute to the ocean. This is with the current rate. With that scenario, 400% higher, it will be like 4 trucks every minute going to the sea. So I think the case for bioplastics is very clear. And Waldemar already provided one example. The issue is that bioplastics only represent now 0.6% of the total plastic production. So it's really minor for the moment, because the good news is that there is new technologies and companies already focusing on this niche of the market. And if you look at the environmental footprint of bioplastics versus fossil-based plastics, again, the benefits are very clear, depending on the type of plastics, but bio-based plastics can reduce 3, 4, 5 times the carbon footprint. What is the big challenge? The challenge is basically that bioplastics for the moment are not cost competitive because Mr. Potočnik, externalities are not yet internalized into our market economy. And basically you can have premium cost of 30 to 100% more, depending on the plastic. And it's not the reason is not only the price of oil, is that the bioplastics value chains are not yet optimized. The inertia of the plastic industry of the coming 40 decades is not yet there for bio-based plastics. So we need some time and we need investments. We need policies to stimulate that shift. But there is hope. There are already important brands taking the issue of bioplastics serious. And probably you all know that Mazda released the first fully bioplastic car some months ago, interior and exterior. So there are already possibilities to have a car made of bioplastics. So this is a a good example. But beyond these three examples coming from three different industries, which are currently fossil-based or non-renewable, how they could transform based on the bioeconomy. This is what I meant before with this transformational role of the bioeconomy. I would like to emphasize also the bioeconomy's potential for transforming towards sustainable development by providing you three key aspects at a more wider scale. First of all, bioeconomy offers great opportunity for inclusive growth. Just consider the distribution and ownership, for example, of forests compared to the distribution of ownership of oil, coal, or steel. Some people might say, yeah, but it is a challenge to mobilize the biomass because 60 million people, 60 million forest owners are difficult to mobilize. Yes, it's a challenge to mobilize and process biomass, but it's also an opportunity to redistribute wealth, jobs, and infrastructures. As Waldemar mentioned, biorefineries, if we take serious the issue of biorefineries, could be a magnet to attract employment in rural areas, attract SMEs around those biorefineries, like the Metsa group, for example, is doing. So, inclusive growth, Mr. Persson, one important aspect. Second, bioeconomy cannot remain only as a rural affair. Otherwise, we will not succeed. So, the bioeconomy needs to be at the center of the future of cities. It needs to become part of rethinking the cities of the future. Cities will need to be climate resilient, and this will require using the bioeconomy, not only, for example, in terms of building with wood, to make buildings more energy efficient, but for example, by using green infrastructures in the cities, urban forest. There are studies already showing that by placing trees strategically around the buildings, you can reduce heating and cooling needs by 20–30%. So this is the integral approach of bringing the bioeconomy in the city plans of the future. And remember that more than 70% of the population in Europe lives in cities, more than 70% of the GDP is produced in cities, more than 70% of the energy is consumed in cities. So to be successful, the bioeconomy needs to be integrated in the urban development aspects. And the third aspect that I wanted to highlight, and has been mentioned before also, is that bioeconomy needs to result in enhancing our natural capital. So the best investment, the best long-term investment for the bioeconomy is biodiversity. Without biodiversity, we will not have a long-term resilient bioeconomy. But the other way around is also true. So without taking serious the bioeconomy, we will have difficulties to preserve biodiversity. They are the two sides of the same coin. They mutually reinforce each other. And this is very important to take into account, that the bioeconomy can be a strong tractor to finance biodiversity issues in the future. Okay, but to unlock the potential of the bioeconomy, and I am finishing already, we need an ambitious strategy, and a strategy that combines the two concepts, the circular economy and the bioeconomy. And the strategy needs to catalyze a new narrative, a narrative that connects to young people, a narrative that connects to the urban societies, a narrative that connects to the rural societies. In fact, a circular bioeconomy strategy can act as a bridge between rural and urban societies of the 21st century. It could act as a tractor, as a bridge between the two of them, connected to address the sustainability challenges that we are going to face in the coming decades. It should be an ambitious strategy, and it should be also coherent in the sense that it should proactively connect with the key policies that are connected to the bioeconomy: climate change, biodiversity, industrial policy, agriculture. Many of these policies are addressing challenges that are interconnected globally. But if you look at the policies themselves, they are not interconnected. And this is, I think, some changing paradigm for policymakers. They have been used to develop standalone policies. This will not work in the future because the challenges are already interconnected. So you need also policies that are connected, which build synergies between them. And again, the bioeconomy, circular bioeconomy, could be also a bridge between policies to bring this coherence on board. Finally, I don't know who mentioned, we need goals. It was in the other seminar, sorry. But an ambitious strategy also needs clear, strategic, ambitious goals and targets. This is very important in a strategy, and ways to monitor the progress towards those targets. And also identify which key sectors can act as tractors to bring the first investments to transform the bioeconomy from a technological reality to an economic reality. So just to finish, in the next months, we have a very busy agenda at the European Forest Institute because we will finish the science policy report that I mentioned. This science policy report, will be presented in Brussels on 7th of November in a new ThinkForest event, and you are very welcome to see the results. But basically, we will try to elaborate further these 5 key elements that we believe are crucial for an ambitious circular bioeconomy strategy. And let me finish with a quote from Mr. Göran Persson. 5 years ago, Mr. Persson, you said this in our ThinkForest event. By the way, a ThinkForest event that was organized in May to discuss the new EU Bioeconomy Strategy, how European forests could support the EU Bioeconomy Strategy. Mr. Persson mentioned that day, and I cannot mimic your voice because I don't have such a strong voice, but without an active forest policy, it will not be possible to improve a green growth economy in Europe. So I would like you, Mr. Persson, later on, if you could reflect, how have you seen this last 5 years? Have you seen an active forest policy in Europe? Or you have seen active policies towards forests? Maybe you could reflect at the end. Thank you very much.
Yes, let's wait and see how much time we have, because we are a little bit behind schedule. Thank you very much, Mark, as always. Structured and to the point. A help for us who need to continue the discussion to have this type of guidelines. Thank you very much. Now it's time for a panel. We don't have a break. No, I am, but if I look upon the watch, it's 3:45, and we have, no, it's not fair, I think. We have panelists who have prepared themselves, and we want to listen to them. So if we sit still and concentrate a little bit, I think we can leave the floor now to the panel, and the panel will be led by Joanna Dupont-Inglis, Chair of the EU Bioeconomy Panel. Please take the lead, and then invite the panelists. Thank you.
Okay, we're live. So everybody is, as you know, live streamed, and the main point of this panel is really to get people to ask as many questions as we can fit into the time that we have left. So we need to make our panelists work, and we need to make our audience work. Just before we start, as Mr. Persson said, I'm Janez Dupont. I'm from Europa Bio, which is the European Association of Bioindustries. We are a membership-funded organisation. We have 70 or so corporate members, and I'm also the chair of the EU Bioeconomy Panel. So we've been involved at Europa Bio in the bioeconomy for a long time now, and we quite regularly ask the question of when are we going to reach the tipping point? When are we going to get to the point where bio-based really takes off? And I have colleagues who felt this was going to happen 10 years ago or 15 years ago, but all the signs continue to be positive. And we've covered so much ground, so many important points made this afternoon about the opportunities that are now there that weren't there before. So many milestones that we've reached over the last decade in particular. We do still have the situation where oil is at historically low prices per barrel, for I think most recently $45. We also have still $5.3 trillion subsidizing going into the fossil industry that needs to be divested at some point over time. So I know that one of the ways we used to look at things, the success of bio-based, was how much steel is going into the ground, how much concrete is going into the ground, how many biorefineries are we building. And indeed, there have been, also in thanks to the bio-based industry's joint undertaking, biorefineries appearing across Europe, which is a fantastic sign. But I think now, as Mark said, increasingly we're looking at the way that consumer brands are taking up bio-based. And recently we've seen Lego, IKEA, Friesland Campina, Jaguar, Mercedes, Adidas, Nike, the list goes on, of consumer brands who are really recognizing the potential. That said, we still have the situation where we know that consumers buy on the basis of whether or not a product works. So we need to have the functionalities in bio-based that work well, and we do, and we will increasingly have more. It needs to cost the the right amount and not too much. And then the sustainability issue comes in. Then people will choose for sustainability, but it's not the first deciding factor. So anyway, just with that as a brief introduction, huge thanks as well to the EFI and to the German Ministry for asking me to moderate this panel, and particularly this particular panel. I'm delighted to introduce. So to begin with, we have Cristina Narbona, who was with the Environment Minister for Spain during the first term of President Zapatero from 2004 to 2008. She was also ambassador for the OECD between 2008 and 2011, and she's currently a member of the Spanish Sustainable Development Solutions Network. So, Cristina, welcome to the floor. Then we have Felix Kreutzig. Felix is a professor at the Technical University of Berlin, so I could probably give you some tips on where to go for a beer after this, if you're not from Berlin. And he's teaching sustainable economics of human settlements and group leader at the Mercator Research Institute on Global Commons and Climate Change. Next. Yes. So our next panelist is Mika Alto, who is head of division at the Finnish Ministry of Employment and the Economy in its Enterprise and Innovation Department. The division is leading the implementation of the Finnish Bioeconomy Strategy, which is being carried out in cooperation with several other key ministries. So welcome, Mika. And finally, I'm not going to introduce our next panel, our last panelist, because he's already introduced himself and been introduced. So it's Waldemar Kütt from the Bioeconomy Strategy Unit in DG Research and Innovation. So with an eye on the time, I would just like to ask you one quick question to kick off, and then we'll turn to the audience and see who would like to challenge you with a question. Mine will be, with this session, we're looking at what kinds of strategies and actions are needed for a successful bioeconomy for the future. So if I could ask each of you, if you had a magic wand, what one wish or two wishes would you ask for that you think would really make a difference to the development of the bioeconomy as you know it?
Thank you, Joanna. Well, if I had this possibility, I will ask for a holistic approach in the top of the government, avoiding the silos who are disturbing the process of transformation of our economy in order to progress towards a new paradigm. And the second desire could be to find the good indicator to measure progress beyond GDP, because if we are able to measure progress in a new way, it should be easier to convince people that the good direction is the bioeconomy approach.
Great, thank you, Christina. Next question, the same question to Felix.
So as I'm invited here to give an urban perspective, I will give also an urban argument. I think it's key that actually the urban sector takes part and becomes center stage for the bioeconomy. That is perhaps seen by actually three dramatic facts. The first one is urban land take. We will see 1 more million square kilometers consumed until 2050 by cities. And about the size of the area of Germany will be consumed of agricultural productive area, and that's the world most productive agricultural area. So that's actually a key important challenge that is perhaps not the most important one for the agricultural sector, but it's an important one. It's not always seen. Second, we have seen it before, the infrastructure demand, especially as an example of China shows, dramatic demand for cement and steel, dominating actually the emissions in some cases. And we, with the current trajectory of urbanization, we will have the same again, like 3 or 4 times until 2050. Dramatic demand for example, wooden buildings and other options. And then the consumption side, there are many options, but we also have to think about the consumption side, and perhaps one can be very targeted and just think about phasing out plastic bags in favor of bio-based plastics.
Thank you.
Okay, if I had a magic wand, I would start with a very clear and crystallized view on what the global drivers mean actually, and what kind of demand there will be for new bioeconomy solutions in the market. And then of course, develop those solutions in very wide cooperation between different actors. We need the cooperations in many directions. It should be cooperation between the policymakers, so we need policy coherence. We need cooperation across the industrial areas, so cross-industrial cooperation is needed, and also cross-disciplinary work in development of the scientific breakthroughs and new innovations. And then of course, cooperation between all those groups. And if I had a third wish, the magic wand would wish actually some more funds actually for Waldemar and his colleagues in the Commission. So I think the total was 3.8 billion in your slides, Waldemar. Maybe the wish would be 5.
Well, that would be also one of my wishes, but it's a very complicated question. I mean, I was just thinking about it actually the last 5 minutes. I think we need an artificial intelligence that looks at the different issues surrounding bioplastics, for instance. I mean, there's so much questions about sustainability and whether it's better for greenhouse gas emissions, or how does it work better or whatever. I mean, sometimes the questions we have are so complex. I talked to 5 specialists and we don't agree, okay? And that's really sometimes annoying. I see this as very annoying. And maybe we need kind of an IPCC type of organization that looks at the different pathways of a bioeconomy and tells us it's better to not use biomass for bioenergy and go for wood buildings because it has these and these effects. We cannot, I mean, nobody can answer that question right now because, I mean, it's too complex, people have different views or whatever. So maybe we need no science, but we need some kind of over-intelligence that tells us, well, these are the facts and this is what I'm coming up with. And, well, that's why I came with an artificial intelligence. Maybe that would help.
Thanks, Waldemar. I remember actually you mentioning once before when I talked to you the phenomenon of paralysis by over-analysis, and I think we get stuck in this situation very much with bio-based, where we feel until we have all of the answers and all of the information, we can't move forward. But I think we can all agree that I don't think any renewable industry has evolved in that way. It's a question sometimes of learning by doing. So if we go to the audience now, does anybody dare to venture a question to any of our panelists, or does everybody need a bit longer to think about it? Any questions? Oh, there's one there.
Uwe Fritsche from INAS. Just a question following up on the intervention of the first speaker. Muchas gracias for the point you made. The holistic thing, we heard this also from the FE president. We have to be out of the silos, cross-sectoral. I'm happy to hear that. But unfortunately, what is the system which delivers on that? And we have a practitioner from the Commission, and as far as I understand, you are pretty much alone in the DG your work. And the colleagues from DG Climate, the colleagues from DG Move, from Growth, you name it, they have their own agendas and they don't integrate necessarily. So what would be the means to deliver on this holistic thing, not only from a scientific point? I think we're doing our homework a little bit in that regard, but how can we get a governance system which actually delivers on a more holistic view, and how can we bring in that to the business reality? I think that's the other end of the game. Cooperation is nice, but if they actually are antagonizing, the one market segment is in opposition to the other one, who integrates? So I think that's the core thing for something like the bioeconomy, which would be sustainable.
I'm not sure what the question really was, but well, I think you need either the artificial intelligence that tells everybody to say, okay, this is true now, and this is the environmental impacts or whatever. So I can talk to my DG Environment colleagues, and you know, we have a basis on which to discuss and take a decision. But sometimes these things go left and right, and you never, you know, it's very hard to take a step forward. So now, either you have that and you convince people that there is potential and you move on, that's at our level, or you put it very high up in the political level and say, okay, this is now top priority for the highest political level to push it through. I think we're somewhere in the middle with the whole bioeconomy strategy, which sometimes makes it work in certain areas. I mean, it's not only that DG Research is working on this. I mean, DG Grow has for a long time had this expert group on bio-based products, for instance, which delivered standards on bio-based products. So a lot has been delivered also from other DG. But it's true, I mean, we have an inter-service group where we discuss about bioeconomy things, but it doesn't have the, let's say, the full political push, let's say, inside the Commission. As it may have in Finland. I mean, in Finland the situation is a bit more stronger because there's more commitment from other, because I mean, Finland is a stronger bioeconomy than Brussels. There it's more clearer what the bioeconomy is about. That's why I also said before in my speech, regional, national, European, there are different issues there. And what is easier in Finland to talk about a bioeconomy strategy is much more complicated in Brussels to deliver a narrative.
Thanks. Christina.
Yes. Well, I believe that we need a combination of a very strong commitment in the top level of politician power, the government, any kind of government, combination with a strong public awareness about the issues we are discussing here. No? We need both sides of the coin. Because at the end of the day, politicians need the support of people. If people is enough informed, enough aware about the effects, for instance, on their own health, not only the ecological problems, but also the problems that everybody, any citizen is experiencing today because of the pollution, because of the climate change, you know? So if we succeed to create the atmosphere in the public opinion by disseminating information, by creating links between science and NGOs and business, then the politicians should change their mind in the sense of avoiding this silos approach and maybe creating a top responsibility in delivering the Sustainable Development Goals as a transformational agenda that now is one of our duties. And in this combination, I can see the possibility for a future.
I would add on top of this, of course, the commitment from the high policy level is utmostly important, and that we do have in Finland, as Waldemar said. Bioeconomy and clean solutions is among the 5 priorities that the current government has chosen. In the wider context, I would still call for thinking from actually all of us. I see some kind of teams that are sort of repelling each other. Some people are saying, no, we are doing circular economy and that is the right thing, and we don't need bioeconomy. The other ones are saying, well, we do bioeconomy and circular economy is not that important. Actually, they are complementing each other, and I see a lot of synergies there, and it's really important actually that we succeed in all of these areas. So we should look for the synergies and try to actually realize our goals, the environmental goals, the economic goals, and the sustainability goals in as many ways as we really can. So there's nothing wrong in having many lanes to approach these issues, and everybody is doing a good job here. We have a common goal there, but it's sometimes it seems lost in the discussions, everyday discussions.
Okay, does that provoke any other questions? Yep.
Okay, Joachim Kreiser from DGJRC in Brussels. I would like to add a little bit to the answer of Waldemar, in the sense that the Commission has started or is implementing a policy from the top level, trying to break the silos between the different DGs, with We have a decision, a commission decision on knowledge management and data sharing and so on. In this context, we are together at the moment in the process of setting up what we call a knowledge center on bioeconomy. And in this context, I'm circulating the different DGs at the, let's say, policy officer level. And in many cases, yes, they know that they are somehow concerned and interested, but it is not mainstream in their own policy thinking. So part of this knowledge center will be to try to provide them with knowledge, which is more than only data and information, about bioeconomy and different aspects of bioeconomy to foster this holistic approach. So the long-term hope with this approach would be that we create discussions between the different policymakers to understand each other better and to develop this holistic approach. But it's a long way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Joachim. Yes, actually, I mean, it brings me back a little bit to something that Felix was saying about this infrastructure that's needed in this cross-sectoral dialogue, particularly about urban development of bioeconomy. Where do you see the biggest challenges there in the experience that you've had so far?
Actually, the silo-style thinking also applies here quite straightforwardly. Like I started the example of Beijing that is very important, of course, in this context, and the understanding of action is very well there, but only in specific segments, and the transport department had a different way of thinking and so on. Mm-hmm. So like the challenge here is similar from the policy side. It's perhaps interesting to look also from the narrative point of view. I come from a climate change community, and that was to some degree successful because it had a very simple narrative. It's a 2-degree target, it's a 450 ppm in the atmosphere. It's a very simple metric that everyone can to some degree understand. So, and bioeconomy is a little bit more complicated because it has like different entry points and perspective. And I think there's also a challenge here to find like the entry points that are easily communicable to many. Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm guessing, Mika and Christina, from what you say about top-down leadership, when we're thinking that we have a reasonably limited amount of time now to communicate the message to, for example, the Commission, that whether or not we want and need an EU bioeconomy strategy, a revision of the current strategy. Would I be right in assuming that you think that's an important thing? I mean, we've seen over the years since the EU strategy, this mushrooming of new strategies around the member states and around the regions that are very specific to regionalities and to the different circumstances that there are across Europe. So do we really need an EU strategy or a revision of the current one?
Well, I think that we need a very clear leadership from the European Commission, but of course the specific circumstances of each country demand an answer coming from their own governments and their own social sectors. No? So we need this update of the bioeconomy strategy at the European level. We need an effective observatory at the European level in order to create the conditions for each and every member state to develop their own strategy. But I think the role of the European Union also in this field, as it was in the field of climate change many years ago, now it should be considered as a priority for also to help the countries.
I'd start by actually reviewing some of the achievements of the current EU Bioeconomy Strategy that was actually published in 2012, so it's about 5 years old now. And I think the most remarkable achievement has been the founding of the Bio-Based Industries Joint Undertaking, which is a very large program actually, which is involving the companies very intensively there. So also the leverage for the Commission funds is very good there. The other one is founding the EU Bioeconomy Panel, which creates a large-based, wide-based discussion on the bioeconomy and brings it forward in that way. What shows the commitment from the member states is the number of bioeconomy strategies that have emerged since 2012, the latest additions being Italy, France, and Norway. So the member states are on board there, and I do feel that now that 5 years have passed, as many of the goals have been actually achieved already, we do need a new look on the EU Bioeconomy Strategy and renewal of it. We need to renew and crystallize the vision of the bioeconomy, because we are much wiser than we were 5 years ago, and we need a common view also on the new targets and new measures to be completed in the next period of time. So yes, there is a need to renew the EU Bioeconomy Strategy, and that's how we think of this thing in Finland, and we are ready and very willing to cooperate also with all the member states and the Commission in reaching that document and going through that process, which are both important things to really take the EU bioeconomy forward and ultimately create well-being, new jobs, and economic benefits for Europe.
Great. Thanks, Mika. Another question from the audience.
Tom Heap from the BBC. We've heard a lot of talk about the importance of science, particularly from the European Forest Institute. I'm just wondering what the panel's view is. Should we be encouraging scientists to do more genetic work on trees, maybe including gene editing? And what would the Commission's view be on genetically modified forests?
So an easy one for you there. Who wants to try that one first?
There is no view on genetically modified forests from the Commission. Very easy, very easy answer. We have a legislation on GMOs, what is considered to be GMOs. They can be used in the context of the current legislation. There has been, we're talking maybe about new technologies, new genetic engineering technologies, whether they consider to be GMO or not. I'm not going to comment on that issue now. There are lots of scientists talking about this. There are lots of lawyers talking about this. This is way from unclear to have a yes or no answer to this. It's too complex. We would need about a 3-day conference to do that, so I'm not going to embark on that one. In the current situation, everybody who wants to do this can use these technologies. Whether there's going to be a court case in 5 years to say it was or not a GMO, that's another issue. So that's how I think for the moment this is going to develop. So that's my point. I mean, if these technologies can be useful, but I don't know. I'm not a forest manager. I think genetic trees will only give us some results in 50 years. So that's a long time to genetically modify trees to use it for new timber. I think even in the current situation with the technological advances, timber being used for housing and construction. I mean, we have a lot of technologies already there. This is not going to make or break with some genetic engineering, I think. So I think it's a minor detail of the whole issue.
As a scientist, I would like to add that I think the key question is indeed more like what Waldemar also was referring to before, like assessing the situation correctly, like in a sort of RPC or whatever. For example, the question of what is the sustainable extraction rate in bio-based economies in forest, in which kind of context, and how to achieve at the same time stable ecosystems. That is known in specific examples very well. It is not known on a broad scale for like comprehensively knowing what kind of amount of product at the end can get out sustainably. So I think there's an open scope for research, and I think these kind of questions should really be also addressed top priority.
Back to you, Waldemar.
Yeah, maybe can add something on that? I think that's one of the key roles, and I talked about stocks and flows in my presentation. I think what nobody in the bioeconomy has done so far is to know how much does this system, the biosphere, can deliver. How will it depend on if we can, for instance, have higher productivity of plants, a factor of 2, with whatever means. Or we get rid of a third of our food waste. What would that mean in freeing up resources? I mean, this is a very complex system. I think this is where science can tell us, okay, what is the predicted, let's say, supply of sustainable biomass? What if we would build houses? What would the demand be? How much of bioplastics could we substitute? Is this going to work? Even putting that in a big equation and finding out what the safe and non-safe parts are very complicated. Nobody has done this so far, nobody. As far as I know, there has been first prognosis, but these are more, let's say, very rough sketches. But that is something that we need. We need something like that, like the IPCC that says, under these and these circumstances, we have 1 or 1.5. Under these and these circumstances, we're going to have a biosphere that works or not work. We're going to over or underexploit, like Janez said it. We cannot afford to underexploit, because for climate change reasons and others, we cannot afford to overexploit. I think that's one of the major things that I think a central bioeconomy strategy could do, because I think that is very important. And science can do.
Okay. There's two questions here at the front. So, Mark, and then...
Very shortly, because that is very good question. Thank you, Tom. And it's rather philosophical. And it's also a question how research and science has evolved in the last decades. You know, the type of projects that you are mentioning, why we don't have this type of knowledge? Because basically the type of rewards we have offered to scientists is to move towards more specialization in science. Top publications, very specialized research topics. And now what we face is that this type of complex problems cannot come from a single discipline, the answer. You need contextualized knowledge at different scales. The problem is that we don't have the research projects and the scientists used to speak the same language. So we need also from the Commission at the national level to finance this type of projects and to reward scientists to address this type of questions. This is when you mentioned before that for some questions scientists do not agree because they speak different languages, they have been specialized in their narrow disciplines. And this is a problem that also we are facing at the European Forest Institute and we are trying to change. Because the complexity of the issues we are dealing requires disciplines talking to each other. Scientists are not used. Our research programs do not support or promote this type of research, and we need more of this type of research. So it's a very philosophical and interesting one.
Thank you, Mark. If you could pass the microphone to the gentleman behind you, that would be great.
Okay, I'm Jose Manuel Jacoto from Spain, from the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, Food and Environment. I'm a forest manager, and we are not dealing with genetic modified forest. We are dealing with genetic improvement. What we are doing is to get a better forest, but working with the same trees that we are dealing with. For instance, we have a program that maybe you know is the improvement old program that we got 7 clones that are resistant to the illness of the olms. The question that we said the clone word, people start thinking in the dolly ship. And this is not the only thing that we did is to take the best trees in every place and to reproduce them. I would like to remark the difference between genetic modify and genetic improvement. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, we have one question right at the back.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Sarah Kloke. I work in the German Ministry for Environment on the land use change and forestry regulation that is currently negotiated on EU level. So this regulation is on the accounting from a climate perspective of the LULUCF sector. And I would like to thank you, the panelists, for bringing up the temperature goal. Because I think it's really key to integrate this into your strategy as well, because I feel that at the moment it's a bit about the silos that we already talked about. This is not really connected yet because, I mean, we have agreed with the Paris Agreement to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees compared to pre-industrial times. And this means that we need to reach greenhouse gas neutrality in the second part of this century. And for reaching greenhouse gas neutrality, natural sinks will play a vital role. So the question is, how much of this sink can we actually reduce in the midterm for also bioeconomy, and how does this all go together in the end? So I would like to approach you with my aim, not only mainstream your aim into the other silos, but also mainstream the climate aim into your, into your bioeconomy strategy.
Does anyone like to react?
LULUCF is a hot potato at the moment, really. And coming to the disagreements between the scientists, it's been baffling me as an engineer to see how different views we can get of the carbon sink effect. We have about 105 million cubic meters of wood growing in Finland, the annual growth, I mean. And there's a certain number how many tons of CO2 every cubic meter really absorbs from the atmosphere. And that's the engineer's way of calculating it, but there are many other disciplines showing actually varying numbers there. The only fact is that the sustainable forest management practices aim to really ensure that the growing stock will be remained. We don't take more than is growing, and that's a way of taking care of the carbon sink, that it stays and it actually grows. So according to some graphs that I like to show, in Finland we've been accumulating wood since the year 75, so the annual growth has been way larger than we actually take out for more than 40 years. So that's how we have been doing our share in this thing.
Thank you very much. It's a wonderful question. And like what our research is showing, or like we are thinking that we show, is that perhaps one strategy is actually to take land as a starting point, not take agriculture, not take bio-based products, not take carbon sink, and not take biodiversity itself as a first one, but always to start with the land, and then see how you manage these kind of common goods or different objectives. And of course, I mean, the answers then are very, very complicated, but you can then see some sort of priorities. One of the priorities is that biodiversity is one of the toughest challenges because it's even more irreversible than climate change. And there are some key hotspots like Amazonian rainforest and Malaysian, Indonesia deforestation, which is very much related to European imports of soya and palm oil. And there's one key target to start with. Then the question of what to do in specific circumstances is not very clear, but there are some ways forward. One is like, of course, start with the food sector, start with food waste, think about meat consumption that might be in some cases not necessary at the same amounts and would be very much land saving and land sparing. And then do go much more in land intensive management, like management intensive strategies that are really like thinking about what works and in what kind of order works best, and not so much about energy intensive land working.
Christina?
Yes, I am not a specialist in forest management, but I have been dealing with ocean problems in recent years. So I would like to add some blue inside in this green discussion, because oceans are covering 70% of our planet, and they are indeed the biggest sink for CO2 and also for the warming process. And oceans are losing their capacity to storage CO2 because of the acidification and also because of the loss of biodiversity. So if we like to have the whole picture, not only on the land, but also on the oceans, we have to combine and to complete this discussion with the sustainable management of fisheries and biodiversity in the sea. Let me say that there are already a high consensus in the scientific community that it is possible to close 1/3 of the oceans to any kind of activity without creating any kind of economic negative consequence, because there are possibilities to continue fishing in the other 2/3 parts of the ocean, and at the same time using this decision to restore the ecosystems, to restore fisheries, and then also to improve the quality of this green sink, which is blue sink, which are the oceans.
Thanks. Okay, I think we have time for just one more question. So there's one just here at the back. Okay, maybe two, if it's a quick one.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Karl Gremse from the Federal Institute of Risk Assessment, and I'm a forester but work in food safety, and that's where my question is going. Chairman Potočnik said something about the food chain and inventing other things in the food chain. Is his major, so to speak, screw where he can improve things? Short question, maybe somebody can tackle it. Has there been also thought already given to altering this very basic necessity of emerging risks? And I'm not wanting to be gloomy now. I just want to know whether or not we've been thinking about this to identify possibly another field of study. Thank you very much.
Does anyone want to try answering that or ask for any clarification?
Well, the only thing I could say is of course, that this is a very complex system. I mean, we should actually talk about an agri-food chain, because I mean, you cannot disconnect the agricultural production, primary production, from food production. I mean, the efficiency gains you can get or circularity gains are very important. I mean, in our bio-waste that we produce, plus manure or whatever, there are 2.7 times the fertilizers included that we need annually for fertilizing our ground. So if we can get 1/3 of fertilizers back from the waste we produce, we will have a more circular system. Food chains, I mean, it's very complex to understand what point you mean, but I think it is very important in the future to look at the overall food chain or systemic food production to see, how can we use different wastes from food production to get new materials. I mean, that is what the BBI, which I had only 2 examples. I could give you a new example of a big food company which is now kind of using its waste to produce new products. I mean, they were coming more and more circular. I mean, you used to be just producer of one thing, you would throw away the rest, and maybe you had to pay for it to get rid of it. Now this is over. I mean, people are really getting to using the new technologies to make it circular. So it's very interconnected.
Thank you, Waldemar. Okay, our very last question here at the front. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Markku Laukkanen. I'm a journalist from Finland. And Mark told here earlier about food construction. My question is that if I build 6 floors, multi-store housing wooden house, how much our forest need time for growing up this volume of wood?
I don't know.
This is very interesting question because it shows that forest is really sustainable. But the answer is 29 seconds in Finland, Finnish forest. And if I'm using CLT's cross-laminated timber massive wood, it needs 1.5 minute. So 1.5 minute, 6 building storehouse. It's really sustainable. But the second question, if Chair, you allow, we talk about research and development because we need to create these bioeconomy markets and develop all these products to the markets. Where would you like to use this research and development investments in future for creating market?
You mean in the framework program?
Yeah, which kind of fields you would like to use this money?
I mean, that's a discussion we are currently starting. I mean, we have the new framework program coming out 2020. I mean, a lot of the discussions we will have here and in the next year or two will identify what the problems are. I mean, if we come back to bioeconomy, I can say, well, we'll have so much million for bioeconomy research, but what is the bioeconomy? It's very complex. So I think maybe also for bioeconomy strategy or policy, you need to focus on a few things. You need to say, okay, we're not going to change the whole bioeconomy, but maybe we can say, well, how can we use wood much better, classical wood applications, to go into more sustainable production, whether this is now buildings or whether it's textile or whatever. That could be one particular challenge. But you can also say, well, let's make a fully circular fertilizing system in agriculture, fully circular, or at least 50% in whatever. I cannot answer these things. I think it's a matter of what is best done at the European level. Last time around we made the BBI. Hopefully we'll have a new BBI in the future to develop the technologies that you need for a more circular system. I think definitely what we will doing is more cross-stakeholder, cross-industries research that we want to finance, because this is totally new. I think the issues that the technologies they use to really get fertilizers out of manure, they would work with the wastewater companies, because they've done this job for 20, 30 years. They know much better. And indeed there are things you need to do to make things work that are very complicated. But you need to identify where are the particular issues. Maybe focus on 20 challenges, missions, whatever, and then get those done. But because it's very hard to say we're going to do all this for the bioeconomy. What is it?
So that's a challenge for all of us. I guess it's our job to identify where the biggest opportunities are and to figure out what needs to be funded. Great. Well, before I hand over to President Persson, I'd just like to say a huge thank you from all of us to our panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joanna Dupont-Inglis, for the way you conducted this task. I think we have had one of our better seminars today. As you know, we have been trying to stimulate the European forest debate the last 5 years. And I must say, I have not always been satisfied when I have left the seminars. Sometimes they have been meaningless, to be honest. And that is my fault. Today, we have had excellent contributions. And perhaps because we are coming close to something. That might be the reason. There might be a breakthrough regarding bioeconomy. There might be. If you listen carefully to what Mark Falai said in his intervention about the plastics, the textiles, the construction sector, and the tremendous effect that should have, for instance, on carbon footprint. He might be wrong. That might be wrong in calculation, but it can't be so massively wrong. So the point is lost. If he's right, I think we soon will see a development of that kind. But I don't think that this group will be the fathers of that development. We are dealing with the first phase, research, development, political discussion. It's up to the business society to take care of this baby. And with these tremendously good results, there are strong economic incentives to do so. And it should surprise me very much if it should not happen. So therefore, I think the atmosphere is we are coming close to something, perhaps a breakthrough. That would be extremely, extremely good if that happened, of course. Compared with the situation 5 years ago that Mark asked me to reflect upon, it's a radically different situation today. Perhaps it takes 5 years to have the structure for an intellectual process, to sort out all the bad ideas and to find the good ones. That is also a process that needs time, and perhaps we are coming close to the situation where we can see some results. In 5 years, I think this is taking place, what Mark talked about. What worries me is the following. I'm not sure that it happens in Europe. That is the problem. And if you look upon the investments now in the traditional forestry industry, it's very much about investing in pulp. The pulp is exported to other parts of the world. It's virgin fiber. It's a world-class raw material. And that is what I'm producing at my farm, delivering to the forestry industries that want to buy it and produce pulp. I want them to produce more advanced things and produce it in Europe and hopefully also in Sweden and Finland, of course. Because if that happens, then there will be a competition about my product, my raw material, and I will be a little bit better paid. And that is to look upon a development question for the countryside, for the rural development perspective. It is the best thing that can happen if there is a competition about what we produce. But if we just produce it, export it to China or other parts in the world, and they produce the next generation bio-based products that the world needs, then we are still on the same development level as before. This is perhaps what we should focus upon the coming years. And there I can see that the traditional forestry industry in Europe is not especially strong regarding research and development. It is not the industry that is dominating in that sector. 5 years from now, hopefully I'm wrong. But if we don't start discussing it, I might be right. Here we can also see a task, I think, for both the European Union and national parliaments to encourage in this process. Thank you for coming. Hope to see you again in Brussels the 7th of November when we will present our product about the bioeconomy and circular economy strategy. Because then the seminar continues and we take one more step forward towards the success and the future. Thank you for coming. Goodbye.